All right, we're looking here at part 24 in the prepares to table before me, a series on wild harvest edibles. And as we think about things that we eat, we also can think about the fact that they have properties that are helpful for our health as well as our nourishment. And from a medicinal standpoint, just remember that if you're navigating any kind of a healthcare challenge, that you find someone who has a similar philosophy of care that you do and work with them. And this could be an additional tool in your wellness toolbox. It's educational in nature, and you should be sure to investigate further any protocol or idea that you might find yourself wishing to partake in. So our topic tonight, our first area of study, will be looking at the role of and edibility of black and blue elderberry, Substantia nigra, and there are two different subspecies of that, the blue variety and the black variety, but they're both very powerful and important and potent herbal medicine. Many people probably have black elderberry in their lineup of things that they look for and go to if they have a sickness that comes up. Actually has very potent antiviral properties, which is typically what it's used for during flu season. In many cases, in a medicinal role. But its appearance that you can see on the right there has nice white flower clusters that will then turn into the berries. It can be up to 12 feet tall, so it can get very, very tall. Some notable things about it is that it has a pithy core in the stems, so it's kind of a soft, spongy core to it. The young stems are smooth. The middle-aged ones kind of have bumps on the bark, little raised areas, and the older canes or bark trunk pieces are going to have deep furrows or fissures in them. This can get very, very tall if it's unpruned and as it ages. The leaves are compound and opposite. So you can see the clusters there. I'll move my cursor up here. You can see that they're opposite each other, but they're compound, and this is the petiole, and they have additional leaves coming off that. That's what makes it a compound leaf. But they're also opposite each other. So they have a dense, cream-colored, kind of flat flower arrangement. The individual flowers have 5 petals, and they can be up to 12 inches across. And then those will convert to berries, and those will be black to purplish or blue when they're ripe, depending on the subspecies that you're looking at. So you don't want to confuse this with water hemlock. Some major differences between water hemlock are going to be typically its area of growth. The black elderberry is going to be more uplands, drier soil versus more moisture in the water hemlock. The water hemlock is herbaceous. So comparing the different parts of it. So a grass is herbaceous. It's going to have a fleshy stem, whereas the elderberry is a woody stem. The hemlock doesn't have bark, it just kind of has a skin, whereas the hemlock has bark associated with it. The hemlock has a hollow stem, so you could blow air through the hemlock stem. You probably wouldn't want to do that, but you could. The elderberry is filled with a pith, a soft pith. That could be hollowed out, and then you could use that core of the elderberry stem for something to blow something through. But alive, it has a soft pith in it, pithy core. The stems of the hemlock, the poison hemlock, are blotchy or purple blotchy or totally purple, while the brown bark is the part of the elderberry. So just something to be aware of, some comparisons between the two different types there. Just want to make sure that you're getting elderberry when that's what you're looking for. From an edibility standpoint, the elderberries are the portion that you typically eat. It's oftentimes the black in particular considered non-toxic if they're used fresh. But according to the sources that I've been looking at, it's best to always cook them first, whether they're blue or black, because some people can become ill even with the fresh berries. So they're generally considered toxic unless cooked. So the uncooked berries and skin are going to have some toxic qualities, and the cooking actually deactivates that. So again, cook before eating. The flowers are edible, but only when completely dry. Don't use them fresh. So you can clip them when they're in bloom. Probably don't want to clip them all from a bush because you're going to want berries too if you have one at your access. And then dry those flowers because you can use those flowers for edibility as well as for medicinal purposes. The berries can be cooked down into a syrup for a condiment, as well as it can be used for medicinal purposes. So elderberry syrup on pancakes sounds like a probably pretty tasty treat. So that's the edibility component of elderberry. So it is used as an edible source of food, but it actually tends to have a higher quality or higher role to play in the medicinal role. So the flowers, the leaves, the cooked berries are the primary components that are used for medicinal purposes. Elderberry tincture can be used on a daily basis, especially as you start moving into fall, into flu season, or other periods of time where there might be viral components around. And then as a preventative, so prophylactically, if you end up feeling like you're getting sick, then up that to 3 to 4 times per day if feeling an illness coming on. So you can use a glycerin extract to extract the medicinal qualities from the elderberries. So it's actually a good early treatment option. As soon as you start feeling it coming on, go ahead and get that elderberry going. I know the primary author that I was gleaning this information from carries a tincture with her all the time, just as a prophylactic, ready at hand remedy to begin right away if she starts to feel run down. So as a preventative, after infection, it actually reduces the spread and severity and the longevity or duration of the illness, particularly viral, bacterial-based illnesses. And it's one of the best antivirals known. There's a lot of research that supports it, supporting the efficacy of black elderberry tincture and its use in early treatment options. It's a long history of effective use. And one of the beautiful things about it is it's safe for children in the tincture or syrup form. Again, it's going to be cooked, and that will deactivate any toxic components. But it's a history of safety in children as well as adults. So the flowers, again, they're dry, can help reduce inflammation. And the way that they do that is helping to drain mucus, promote sweating, again, functioning in antiviral, anti-inflammatory, and actually even in anti-cancer roles. And actually can be a very powerful fever reducer, febrifuge, when used with yarrow. So you'd use those dry flowers, you would use them in an infusion to make a tea from them to use for helping the mucus to drain, to essentially thin it and allow it to move out of the body, and then also promote sweating. And the sweating actually would create a cooling effect, and that's the primary role of sweating, and also function to be a detoxifying mechanism or agent. So bruises, hemorrhages, sprains, you can actually take the leaves. You can see the leaves of the elderberry here around the elderberries that are in the view here, and just use the elderberry leaves as a poultice to the area that's been sprained or bruised. You can use an oil infusion and apply that oil topically, that in replacement of just the leaf poultice. So they use those on an external basis. So to make that infusion, just pack leaves into a small pint jar and cover it with oil, olive oil, and then shake, kind of turn that daily for 4 to 6 weeks to do that infusion process, and then strain and use the oil, date label, and store it. So you can use that oil as a remedy for hemorrhoids, bruises, and sprains. So the eyes actually can benefit from elderberry too. Conjunctivitis is essentially inflammation of the conjuncta. That's the area down near your nose is the conjuncta, a little pink area just inside your eye. Sometimes that gets inflamed, or other eye irritations. If you get something in your eye, a speck of sawdust or something, and you can make an elderberry flower tea. So again, this is from the dry flowers, not the fresh flowers, and make a tea from that, and then use that as a gentle eye wash. Also functions, just a long history of immune strengthening qualities, just a go-to from the earliest times, very, very beneficial and readily used immune enhancing and boosting qualities of black and blue elderberry. So when you're harvesting an early autumn harvest, so when the berries are fully ripe, the suggestion is to harvest them and freeze them, just freeze them in their clusters, and that actually eases the separation of the stems from the berries. You don't want any stems in the batches that you cook. You want just berries, berries only. And that's important from the toxicity standpoint. So all the parts of the plant have a mild toxicity associated with them prior to their being cooked. So dry or boil the berries prior to use. So you can also dehydrate them, and that functions as well. And then don't use the fresh flowers. Use only dry flower clusters. So don't use any part without drying or cooking first. Just over and over and over again. Repeat to remember, and remember to repeat. So the leaves and the berries are toxic internally if they're uncooked. And actually, the bark and the roots function to induce vomiting, so as an emetic, if they are utilized or ingested. So making the elderberry syrup, you can use that for in a variety of different ways, and use it 1 to 2 teaspoons for an adult, 1 to 1.5 to 1 teaspoon in children, and you can use it prophylactically. So 1 time a day as a preventative, but up to 3 or 4 times a day if you feel an infection coming on or are getting sick. So here's how you do that. You need a cup of elderberries, some water, and 1 cup of raw honey. So you have a 1-to-1 ratio there of berry to honey. And then if desired, some cinnamon. So basically put the stemless fresh berries in a pot and add just enough water to cover them. You don't want to have a lot of excess fluid there, just enough to basically extracting the medicinal qualities from the berries into the water. So heat those berries on low for 2 hours. Keep a lid on there and just let them simmer. And then once they've been simmered for 2 hours, mash the berries, or you could also puree them in the blender, that water berry mixture. So it'll simmer right down. And then when all the juice is released from the berries, strain through some cheesecloth. You'll get out the skins and the seeds and just have the syrup left behind. Then measure the juice, see what your volume is, and then mix that 1-to-1 with raw unfiltered honey. So you're going to add a sweetener to it. The raw unfiltered honey will provide that role. And if desired, cinnamon can be added to add a different flavor dimension to it, as well as antioxidant components. So place in a clean canning jar and seal it up. And you can do that just by regular canning methods for long-term preservation. So if your sea level to 1,000 feet, a 15-minute water bath. So that water bath is going to cover the tops of the jars with the canning lids on them. And always when you're doing canning, make sure you have clean jars and just run your finger around the top. Make sure there's no nicks or aberrations in the surface that's going to be sealed. And then 20 minutes if you're 1,000 feet or higher. Let them cool, then check their seals, make sure it's sealed. The little dimple is down and not popping in the top of the canning lid, and then label it and store it. So again, use that as needed to prevent illnesses. So 1 drop a day, not 1 drop, but 1 serving a day, 1 to 2 teaspoons for an adult, a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon for children, and then 3 to 4 times a day if you're infected. So good prophylactic as well as early onset antiviral way of approaching an illness. And that's the black or the blue elderberry, Substantia nigra, with a couple different subspecies that are for the black and the blue. Now we'll move on to another plant, and that is the dogwood tree. So remember that trees have some beneficial roles, but they have both the pink and the white cultivars. They grow wild, but they're also cultivated and used ornamentally. And the ornamental, as well as the cultivated or the wild varieties, have these properties, both edibility and medicinal properties. So the leaves are opposite each other with parallel veins that are very pointed at the tip. They're not sharp, but they're just pointed. And the flowers, before leafing out, are when they're seen. So you're going to see the flowers as they begin leafing out. You can see the berries there. The seeds, little drupes, have 1 to 2 seeds hidden inside them. Very colorful. We actually have a dogwood hiding in one of our cherry trees, growing up inside of it. So we have a dogwood that was kind of a fun discovery a couple springs ago. From an edibility standpoint, the fruit is edible when cooked. So again, this is one that requires cooking. You can see the green portions in the middle of those dogwood flowers, the yellow and the pink. Those are going to become the berries, and they're red berries, but they can be eaten when cooked. It probably wouldn't be eaten as a dish alone, but used along with something else. The twigs, so the little branches that are supporting the blossoms, they can be peeled and chewed, kind of function as a toothbrush. So they can kind of help clean the teeth and actually aid in tooth whitening. From a medicinal standpoint, the fruit, the leaves, the bark, and the root all have medicinal qualities that have properties that can be beneficial. From an anti-malarial and fever reducer role, the bark contains quinine. So it's a natural source of quinine. So it can be anti-malarial and help to reduce fever. A tea of the bark induces or brings on sweating, and that functions to both detoxify as well as to cool the body. So the dogwood is a beneficial medicinal and edible tree. So wound care for cuts and bruises, you can make a poultice of the dogwood leaves. So we saw a poultice being used of the leaves of the elderberry. You can also use a poultice of the leaves of the dogwood. Actually functions as an analgesic, so a painkiller. So it helps to deaden the pain, and also anti-inflammatory. You can make a dogwood bark decoction, and that can help ease the pain of sore muscles. Just rub that decoction into the muscles or to joints that might be sore, whether that be from various types of arthritis or just overuse. So how do you make that decoction? So peel the bark. Recommended similar to maple, using the lateral branches so that you're not destroying the tree in the process of taking that bark off, because you don't want to eliminate the tree. You want to be able to have it for future use. So cut that bark into small pieces, put it into cold water in a pot, soak it for 2 hours, and then cover it and bring it to a slow boil and simmer it. So simmer it until the volume is halved, cut in half from what it was originally. That's approximately 15 to 20 minutes. Then strain that through cheesecloth, get the bark bits out, and squeeze out the remnants of the liquid. Put that in a jar, and then use that within 48 hours, or freeze it to preserve it. So there isn't a canning process associated with the preservation of the bark decoction, but just freezing. Nice thing about that is the bark is available year-round, as opposed to the berries, which are seasonal, and the flowers are seasonal. The bark is available on a year-round basis. So that means that you would need to pay attention to what's growing around you. You should always be paying attention to that kind of a thing. Noticed was out in the orchard. Just was reminded that we have a nice birch tree growing on our property, which is nice to know that that's there. There's qualities that the birch has that are beneficial too.